This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Doing all right.
What do we got today?
I'm a little sore because I was finishing up a tile job last night. So
that's right. You're in the process of moving, or you've moved,
true.
And now you're getting the old house ready for sale, right?
That's right. Yeah. So now I'm utilizing my skills, if you want to call them that, to fix up the house.
Awesome.
Painting, drywall, tile work, do it all, man.
Awesome.
Do it all. Anything to save money. And most of the time, I'd probably do a better job than, I guess. I don't get paid to do it, but I'm saving a lot of money doing it myself. No. Maybe for some cowboy coffee.
Yeah. You still haven't had it.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I still drink good coffee. So, all right, I'm going to go over a couple articles. And so the first one, I already know what your response to this is going to be, but I'm going to ask you anyways. So the title of this article is, Should Parents Be Legally Responsible for Violent Teen Takeovers?
So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say
no way.
This has always been the case. I don't know why this is even a question now, other than nobody's enforcing it, right? You have always been responsible for your children's actions. That's why it's important that you bring them up to be responsible children so that they don't do things like this, right? Now, there are things that are out of your control, situations that are completely out of your control, but that doesn't relieve you of your responsibility to control your kids. You can't have it both ways. And this is coming from Kelly, right? You can't have it both ways where you get to let them run around with no responsibility and then they get into serious trouble and then say, well, I'm not responsible for it. You are responsible. And in fact, and to reiterate this, because we've talked about this one before, there is a lady in Orange County, California, who is being charged with the death of I think he was a teacher. I'm pretty sure he was like a substitute teacher, elderly, teaching at a school, walking across a street in a crosswalk, and she had been warned about her son's use of an electric scooter and the way that he was using it. And she let him use it again and resulted in the death of a person. And so now she's facing criminal charges. And I think that's appropriate. We have to do something. If you look at, so this is being recorded the week after the 4th of July. Happy birthday, America. But there were, I lost track at the number of teen takeovers, the number of incidences that involved multiple teens with multiple guns.
Mm.
And it's just crazy. And so to me, there's not only the behavior, but the access to firearms that these kids have.
Yeah.
So I will say that part of that assumption is that they're using their parents' firearms, but that's not always the case. And I'm not so naive as to think that that's their only access. But if you have a child who has the proclivity of that type of behavior, you should explain to them that this is serious and you're going to you're going to suffer the consequences. And there are kids that are out there right now that think there's no consequences. And I think there's more and more judges that are fed up with it, that are frankly charging younger and younger kids with adults with adult crimes. So the bottom line is, I think that every jurisdiction that I'm aware of has that. Every state has that you are responsible for your kids. Now, obviously, it's a whole lot different the way that it's enforced than it was when I was growing up and when I was raising my kids. And we had this conversation too. I think there are classification of crimes that regardless of your age, and I mean regardless of your age, if you commit that crime and you meet all of the elements of that crime, you should be charged as an adult. That being said, minimally, you should be responsible civilly, right? So if your child's out running around and you don't know, I mean, when I was growing up, there was literally on TV at 11 o'clock on your TV.
Where are your kids?
Didn't matter it's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? I've seen where there was an incident in South Carolina, I forget where, I think it was in South Charleston or somewhere, where kids were attacking law enforcement who was trying to make an arrest. Kids. And you're just like, are you kidding?
That's crazy.
And there's a whole lot of societal issues that play here that have caused us the vilification of law enforcement and the the over victimization of the celebration of being a victim and relieving. If you're a victim of something, you've been absolved of all of your responsibility to be, and your ability to be held accountable is crazy. And it shows. It absolutely shows that it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And all I got to say is, I always get pushback when I say this, but I'll say it again. When we're raising our kids, it's like training a dog, training a puppy. We have to train them for everything that we think they're going to experience and how to handle it and how to behave. And you have to do that young. If you don't train them properly and you don't hold them accountable, they're going to run around your house and out in your neighborhoods and attack kids and things like that. That's, if we don't hold our kids accountable, we don't hold ourselves accountable, we don't do that, we're going to see this spiral further and further, because here's what's happening. And you can see it. The crowds are getting bigger and bigger and bolder, and they're moving from I want to say this was in Northern Virginia. There were 3 violent situations in this. It started out as a mall, but then there were, a mile away there was another one, and then another mile away there was another one. But they've linked all 3 of them together. And this idea that have this mob mentality, and the idea that they can't catch us all. They can't catch us all. So, just hope that you're not one of them. Right. And it started years ago with these mobs that have broken into Walmarts and Targets and pharmacies and just absolutely looted the entire store. Apple stores and things like that, absolutely looted them. And nobody was caught. And now businesses are moving out of those areas. They're saying we're not. And the community is upset at the business. They're saying you're taking our ability to go to Walmart and get our food, our clothing, or whatever you get at Walmart, right? And, some of these people in these neighborhoods can't travel.
Yeah.
You forget why Walmart exists. It doesn't exist to give free stuff away. So no. We're going to see more of it until we start getting a handle on it. And more kids there's going to be curfews. There's going to be something they're going to end up having to put further restrictions on it. And those reactions are going to be viewed negatively My kid wasn't there. My kid was there, but he didn't do anything. Well, you don't know that.
Yeah.
It's mob mentality. And so I guess I went on too long about that stuff, but it just infuriating to me. And that we're not protecting those who are trying to protect our community. We're not being responsible for our kids. We're not being accountable to bringing up our kids. You don't have to bring them up like I brought up my kids. I get that, but they need to be responsible, right?
Yep. I think it would solve a lot of our problems. That's for sure.
Right.
Man. All right. The other one that I want to talk about here is, I'm just trying to find when this happened. Okay, so this happened a little while ago, but it's crazy. So this one is a pregnant teacher was kicked in the belly by a student, and then the teacher was blamed for the outburst and then fired.
Mm-hmm.
So this teacher was 6 months pregnant. Looked like it was so she was a special ed teacher, and from the article it seems like maybe, I don't know if she was like subbing or that it was like the student had just got put in her class, because like I think it was maybe a new student or something of that nature, but there was some documented history of violence with this student. Yeah.
But it was a special ed.
There was some documentation
student, right?
that this student had a prior history of violence, but none of that was shared with the teacher. And so then this teacher got kicked in the belly. And on top of that, she gets fired.
Then fired. Yeah. What? Yeah, that I was telling you, I'm not going to say the district, that sometimes we overprotect those who have disabilities. 100% understand.
Mm-hmm.
But there's got to be a balance there. We've talked about this one kid that we had who was 10, 11 years old at the time, and he was deemed the most violent kid in the entire district, right? So he had that title. And I said, what do you mean? He's 10. And they said, well, he's got IEP, 504, he's got it all. So we can't really do anything with him. I said, there is no law that says you have to endure violence from a 10-year-old, anyone for that matter. And there's nothing you can do about it. You just sit there and take it. And, well, we have to go through this process. I get it. There's a thing called a manifestation hearing. And the manifestation hearing is that you have to determine whether or not somebody that you are trying to discipline has whatever their school violation was, whether it was criminal or whatever, whether or not that was a manifestation of their disability or not, right? So, but that doesn't mean you can't discipline them. That means that when you try to discipline them and you suspend them or whatever, then you have to have this manifestation. Then it determines how you discipline them, right? And what you do with them. There is nothing, and in fact, they have special schools spattered about the United States that deal with violent students. The problem is one, they're expensive, as you would imagine. And the school district that sends the kids to that has to pay for that schooling and oftentimes for the family to move there with them, right? So it's expensive, but you still don't have to endure the violence. The other problem is we don't communicate. And if it were me in that situation and I was given a child and there was no communication of the propensity for violence, and you fired me because of some action that kid took towards me, then you would see my lawyer and I would be calling OSHA, because they have a duty to protect from known violence. If you have a violent kid, the school, that's a workplace violence issue, and the school has a duty to protect you and give you the tools.
I'm reading through this more, and there's it kind of gets crazier. Like, of course, I don't know if any of this is true. This is just coming. This is obviously just coming from the teacher, and so I don't. It's there's like a lawsuit. She's, she filed a lawsuit against the school, but there was like a long history since like in 2023 when she was first hired, like the the principal made a joke of like, you're not going to get pregnant or anytime soon, right? And then like it's all these
Yeah,
like
that's
different
always good.
instances of all these different instances of like, let's see, that like, prior, like when she first announced that she was pregnant, the principal like gave her a hard time about it. And then shortly after that, she
I know
was
this is,
she was given a teacher improvement plan. Like what?
yeah, yeah. So that's a tip, and as opposed to a pip.
So that she's almost it's almost like it's like she's trying to say that the because then that student initially wasn't her student, but then that day that student was placed in her classroom and she wasn't told of the prior history of violence. So she's claiming that they purposely threw that student in there for the knowing that student was going to be violent. And then, she went to the hospital and like her baby had like low movement, like she was bleeding and all that stuff. And then after filing like a grievance or something, she was fired just before she would have become tenure eligible. Crazy. All the
Yeah,
backstory to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I will tell you, totally different environment. But as soon as somebody in the military gets pregnant, they get put on essentially light duty,
Yeah.
some sort of. So there's.
Is that like a punishment or is it like a we want to protect you?
We want to protect you and the baby, right? We don't want you
Yeah.
out in a situation that, even if like they call it MOS in the Army and a rate in the Navy, but even if it's, let's say you're outside doing construction or what have you, right? Or you're in logistics. They don't want you lifting things. They don't want you out in an environment that you can get injured. And they put you on, I don't remember what they call it. In law enforcement we call it light duty. And so we would do that in law enforcement. We would put them in a situation that because you never know what's going to happen when you're in an area where there's heavy labor or there's potential for violence or what have you. And so we called it light duty, and I forget what they call it in the military, but they make sure they take care of their service members. So yeah, just doesn't sound like it's going to go well for the district. But I'm not an attorney. Trust me, I'm not an attorney. But I do have a fair amount of labor experience because I spent a significant amount of my career in human resources. I know that's tough for Ethan to believe, but
it is
I did.
tough for me to believe.
I did. And
Kelly in HR, that's crazy.
I supervised the unit. So yeah. But that being said, yeah, it just doesn't. I'm just saying.
I was reading further in that and I'm like, oh my word, this is actually really horrible.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably a lot of it's presented from the teacher's perspective, and not the school's perspective, because the school knows they're going to get sued over this. They're going to say, we don't comment on pending litigation, but yeah, this
crazy
doesn't seem good. I will say that short in closing up that situation I was in, it wasn't but a couple months later, and we literally shipped that kid off to another school out of state. So, but it was there is, like I said, we tend to go too far over protecting the child versus the staff, and we have to strike a balance there. And you just cannot let your staff be subjected to continued violence. Can't.
Yeah, no,
that's not what they're there for.
No, I mean, that's not going to help with your, teachers people want to work.
Sure.
Work for you. That's why you're seeing that decline of, teachers.
Let's take this further out into the realm of school safety. not just with this one teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You are creating an environment, and I know this will surprise you, but this is a leadership issue. It'll surprise you that I'm saying that, but this is a leadership issue. You are creating an environment where your staff feel like you won't support them. You are allowing behavior that you shouldn't be allowing, and you're not taking action. And there are students that are afraid to be around that child. So when you start having and focusing on a particular student and giving them all of those rights, and I understand, but we have to strike the balance, because there are, and I don't know if this is true in this case, but there are other kids in that class that are being threatened by the presence of that one student if he's continually violent. There are staff members who are afraid to take action because you're not going to take action and this kid's out of control. And it causes so many issues. And I know that there's this idea that we shouldn't separate or segregate those with special needs. And I'm not saying every case is this way. But again, we got to think about the totality of the circumstances and their impact on the rest of your school. You have one child who is impacting, and I'm just taking a guess here because I've never done it, probably a third of your school population on the low side. But every student, every staff member knows who that kid is and what he's capable of, he or she is capable of. And that impacts your school environment, your safety, your supportive climate, right? And if you are trying to create a supportive educational environment so that these kids feel safe at school, and you're not dealing with the problems in your own school, your words mean nothing to them. I think there's a saying, I should coin it, if you haven't ever heard of this before: actions speak louder than words. I'm just saying, if you are not supporting everybody, and that goes for bullying, that goes for all of these other behaviors that you have to deal with, and I understand that that's not it's not easy to accomplish, but if you're not, I'm telling you, those kindergartners, those first graders, those pre-K, they know, and they grow up to be kids, because if there's no consequences, and this will go to a lot of when somebody who doesn't have special needs gets in trouble for something, what's the first thing they say?
Well, she was allowed to do it, or he was allowed to do it.
This isn't fair.
They didn't get in trouble.
You're treating me different than you are them. This isn't fair. And we all say, as we grow up, life isn't fair. Don't expect it to be fair. But that's part of what's driving that is, wait a second, he went around kicking the teacher and nothing happened to him. Well, that's different. Why? Try to explain the difference to a third grader. All they see is they're doing one action, somebody else is doing a similar action. They get in trouble, the other one doesn't. They're kids. They don't have that ability to really sit down and look at this academically and say, oh, okay, I get it now. No, they just say, oh, he's special, right? And it just taints their view on the whole system further. So you're trying to make yourself look bigger.
Trying to be more comfortable. Slammed into my desk. All right. So you and I were talking, what was it, last week? I think it was last week. Mm-hmm. That really at the beginning of our podcast, it was kind of structured a little bit different. We had, we're going through like the foundations of school safety. Mm-hmm. And so I think we kind of want to somewhat revisit that, kind of go back over those things.
Yep.
So either you tell me where you want to start, or I can.
You can start wherever you want to start, right? But let's explain why first, right? I don't care where you want to start. There is a sequential process, right? But that being said, let's explain why. I'm going on my 8th year in practicing school safety. One from a direct practitioner and other from the exposure and the consultation and all of the stuff that I do for Crisis Go. So, man, I get it. Somebody's going to say, but you've been in Crisis Go. You're not a direct, you don't get the same thing. I understand that, but I get exposed to issues that are in the entire country, not just the ones specific to your school. Right. And so, and I look at it and I take the 34 years of law enforcement that I have and I weave that and infuse that in everything that we do, because that gives me this sort of unique perspective. And when I start looking at that process, I don't have to be exposed to it every day to understand what's going on. But it's evolved and I've seen the evolution. It's not the same. Our company is not the same as it was. I mean, it's vastly different than it was when I started 6 years ago. School safety is different than when I started 8 years ago. Law enforcement is different than when I started 30 or now 42 years ago. And so all of these things have changed, but the basic process hasn't. How we gain the experience, what the experience is unique to us, and how we and where we're at in our development and all of that stuff. But so I think it's good for us, the teachers, the school safety directors, the administrators, and whoever it was that was listening to our podcast when we first started. What was it, 3 years ago now?
Yeah.
It's like 3 years ago. Most of them have changed their positions. They've moved on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so I think now's a good time to start revisiting some of that. And we can get into whatever you want to get into. But I think it's time to revisit it because so much has changed.
So let's talk about why school safety requires dedicated leadership. What does dedicated leadership mean?
Well, it's kind of in its definition, right? Somebody who is dedicated to the safety of your school. And why do we start there? Because they drive everything that is school safety. And when you say dedicated, I'm not just saying designated. I'm saying dedicated.
Oh.
So there's a lot of people in a lot of states who say you have to have a designated school safety director or coordinator, however they describe that position. But designated means what? It means that you've anointed somebody to be the point of contact, more or less, somebody who's responsible for it, but it doesn't mean that they're dedicated to that position. So there's many, many people in our public schools who are designated as the school safety coordinator, but have no idea what they're doing. It's not a full-time position.
There was times at like the conferences where like we'd have someone come up and they're like, oh, I'm, the IT person, but I'm also responsible for the safety stuff. Right. So a lot of these people had like dual roles.
That's right. And so I think we are getting better at dedicating school professionals. There's so much liability when you have an issue that could have and should have been prevented and you just weren't prepared for it. We've talked about this ad nauseum about we are long past being able to say, although people still say it, but it should have no bearing in school safety, is I don't know what to expect. I don't know what to do. I'm not this isn't my job. I'm just whatever. I'm just an English teacher. I'm just a counselor. I'm just whatever. Everyone has a responsibility. The problem is we see it in business. We see it in law enforcement. We see it in the military. We see it in just about every facet of life. If you have a requirement, a mandate, but you don't have the right person in charge, or you don't designate somebody to be in charge of that function, it belongs to everyone. We've seen it, and we've taken here at Crisis Go a lot of steps to correct this but we're still seeing this to this day. One of the biggest problems that we see in school safety is nobody's in charge. We don't have people who say, this is how you're doing it. We're going to hold you accountable if you don't. This is part of your job. When, we've always been in the school institution, the education institutions that we have, we've always been responsible for keeping our kids and staff safe. It just means something different today. It's elevated quite a bit. And we have taken it further. And most people, most institutions, is because we're still seeing, we say this again, 27 years past Columbine, and we're still trying to figure it out. Part of that is we don't have people who understand the responsibility, who are designated and dedicated to being that person to ensure that your school is safe. And part of that is we have in our communities, we've said this, school safety is community safety is school safety. We still have today, in the vast majority of our schools and our communities, we have the schools with their plans, and that is essentially a silo. They know what it is. They're mandated by the Department of Education or whoever to have these plans. Crisis Go got started by digitizing those plans so that you could have them on your phone, right? Then we evolved into alerting and accountability and all these other things that we do that is, frankly, probably the best in the business. But we still are having the problem. Why is that? We have
because
plans.
There's a human element.
There is a human element, right? And there's also other people who are required to participate in that process who are not participating. And my law enforcement and my fire guys and my EMS guys are all going to say, we participate. Do you though? They're in the same.
Do you know the layout of the schools that you protect?
Can you tell me what the school plans are? Right? If you go, if NASRO just had their conference, if I went to NASRO and I started a survey, what's the biggest problem in school safety? They're likely going to say, I just want them on the same sheet of music that we're on. They're not on the same sheet of music. And I look at, because I've asked them, people at NASRO when I was there, I've asked them that very question. What's your biggest problem with school safety? They just don't get it. They don't understand. Okay. They're not on the same sheet of music. Okay. Are you talking to them about it? Probably not. Fire guys, same way. And it gets even more complicated the more people or more agencies that we include in that participation, because what we see is you have a school silo, a law enforcement silo, a fire department silo, an emergency medical services silo, a hospital silo. They all have these plans, but not one person is responsible for bringing that all together, right? So now we take this back and say, okay, the original question, why do you need a dedicated school safety director? The dedicated school safety director is not only responsible for the school, but the implementation of their plan. And they cannot implement their plan if they are not actively talking with those other partners, the law enforcement, the fire guys, and I'll add somebody else here in a second, the emergency medical, the hospitals, the emergency managers. What you have, I described this before, you have a bunch of musicians who are playing the same music and they're practicing on their own. They're not talking to each other about how do they synchronize, how do they integrate with each other. They're not talking about how they where the staging area is, what the expectations are, who's responsible for what's the sequence of events that we're going to expect. How do we respond to this? How do we communicate with the public? How do we do all of that stuff? Who's responsible for all of that stuff, right? And if you have everyone else, even if they're playing the same music, but they're just playing their part, and then when you have your concert, the day of your concert, is the first time that you come together, it's not going to sound good, right?
Sounds pretty
So
horrible.
if you go along with that analogy, you have an orchestra. The school is the percussion. Let's make the cops the percussion, probably more appropriate. The schools are the woodwinds. The fire guys are the stringed instruments, whatever, right? They all have their own part, but they're practicing this. The conductor says, "Here's your part. Here's your part. Go practice, and we'll see you after you're ready," right? But they don't ever practice together. They don't know when the transitions are. They can't figure that out because they're not practicing together, or how smoothly those transitions go. And then the conductor calls up one Friday morning and says, "We have a concert in 30 seconds. Everyone get down here. We need to get down here right now. It's happening." Do you expect that performance to go well? You wouldn't. Yet that's exactly what we're doing when we have a school incident.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're saying, "Here we go. It's time to perform." And then people are surprised when it doesn't go well, right? They do. What's the number one in an after action review? What's the number one problem identified? Ethan, go.
Communication.
What's the second one?
Communication.
And the third one?
Communication.
Right? You know why? Because they don't practice it.
Mm.
They don't practice it. Communication is as much a part of your emergency response as anything else is. So you need somebody who's going to direct that. And the reason I bring that up I bring up the emergency management agencies within your community, is because everyone has one. And they are a natural fit to do that, because their responsibility, their mandate is that they identify hazards and take steps to plan for them, mitigate them, prevent them, all of those things. How are we going to respond to that? They don't have any authority to say, "This is how you're going to do it." Their authority is to bring everyone to the table, sit down and start working together as a community. If the emergency managers aren't willing to do that, it is the dedicated school safety professional that is responsible for that, because they're the ones that are going to have the incident, right? They have the responsibility to take care of that. Now, I'm trying to advocate that we start activating the emergency managers to take this on in a more active role. Some of the new features that we have coming out will allow us to do that, right? So we'll have more coming on that, but we have all of these emergency operations plans. Where do they sit?
In red binders.
3-inch binders on somebody's shelf. Are we training those properly? We've talked about this we should be training using those EOPs as the foundation of everything that we do in school safety: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, all of those phases, and everything that's included within those 4/5 phases should be in those binders. But we should be training for that, not to go to the binder during an emergency to look at what we should be doing, but as the foundation for our training, to the point where we don't have to do that. We understand what our responsibilities are, our roles are, right? And so I've always said this: we should use them for training as the foundation for everything that we do. That doesn't mean you just leave them on the shelf and you never look at them before. You still need access to them for a couple of reasons. And we talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where if you have an incident and my child is a victim there and I'm going to sue you, my attorney is going to go to your district, your school specifically, and say, "Okay, I get it, things happen, but where's your operations plan? I need to see that. I need a copy of that. I need to see the training that you've done, and I need to see how well you've trained your staff, your teachers, your administrators, so forth. I need to see how that's taken place. I need to see the documentation of the last time that you did that, to see if you have taken the necessary steps to protect my client's children, right? So those things need to be updated. Your training, your after actions, your improvements that you've made, all of that stuff has to be documented. Or some attorney or some judge is going to say how many zeros you want,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yep.
but it's just one of those things that you're going to have to produce that. And if nobody expects you to be perfect, that you did everything perfect, because every situation has its unknowns. There's just nothing you could do to have foreseen what just took place, right? But as long as you're taking reasonable steps and stuff, but it has to be done in a formal process, and you need that dedicated leader in your district who's going to do that. Plain and simple. So that's why you have a dedicated safety professional. And when I say safety professional, I'm not talking about the storage of hazardous materials. That takes somebody with different certifications. We're talking about the safety of your students and so from violence, from known hazards and stuff like that. Not and the reason I say that, when I was at the district, somebody wanted me to give a speech on how to mow grass safely. Lived in Southern California and hadn't mowed grass in 20 years because we didn't have a lawn, because you couldn't water it. We didn't have the water to water lawns. So we had cactus.
What a life.
Right. Now I mow my 2 acres every 2 weeks, right? Or every week, mostly. Although it's been that because we're not getting a lot of rain. But they should be focused on those things that we think about in school safety, not work safety. Although times they do overlap with it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.